The rain poured down in sheets, turning the streets into rivers of mud and debris. Officer Mark Harris tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the deluge. It had been a long shift, and all he wanted was to get home to his wife and daughter. But as he turned onto a deserted side street, his headlights caught something moving in the shadows. He slowed the car, squinting through the rain. It was a dog, a scruffy, mud-covered stray, limping along the edge of the road. Its ribs were visible through its matted fur, and its eyes glowed faintly in the headlights. Mark sighed. He wasn't an animal person, but he couldn't just leave it there. He pulled over, grabbed an old blanket from the back seat, and stepped out into the storm. The dog froze, its ears flattening against its head as Mark approached. "Hey, buddy," Mark said softly, crouching down. "You look like you've had a rough night." He held out the blanket, hoping the dog would come to him. But instead of retreating, the dog took a tentative step forward, its tail wagging weakly. Mark wrapped the blanket around the shivering animal and carried it to his car. "All right, you're coming with me," he said, more to himself than to the dog. "But just for tonight." Mark's wife, Sarah, wasn't thrilled about the new house guest. "You know we can't keep it, right?" she said, eyeing the dog warily as it devoured a bowl of leftover chicken. Mark nodded. "I know. I'll take it to the shelter tomorrow." But as the night wore on, something unexpected happened. The dog, whom Mark had started calling Scout, refused to leave his side. It followed him from room to room, its eyes never leaving his face. When Mark sat down to watch TV, Scout curled up at his feet, resting its head on his boots. And when Mark finally went to bed, Scout lay down outside his bedroom door, as if standing guard. The next morning, Mark called the local animal shelter, but they were full. "We can take him in a few days," the woman on the phone said apologetically. Mark hung up and looked at Scout, who was sitting patiently by the door, his tail thumping against the floor. "Guess you're stuck with me for a little longer," Mark said, scratching the dog behind the ears. Scout responded with a happy bark, and for the first time in years, Mark found himself smiling. Over the next few days, Scout became a constant presence in Mark's life. The dog followed him everywhere, from the kitchen to the backyard, and even sat by the door when Mark left for work. Sarah, initially hesitant, began to warm up to Scout. "He's really attached to you," she said one evening as they watched Scout play with their daughter Lily. Mark nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yeah, he's a good dog." But Scout wasn't just a companion, he was a protector. One night, as Mark was taking out the trash, he heard a low growl from behind him. He turned to see Scout standing at the edge of the yard, his hackles raised and his teeth bared. Mark followed the dog's gaze and saw a shadowy figure lurking near the fence. "Who's there?" Mark called, his hand instinctively reaching for his phone. The figure fled, and Mark felt a surge of gratitude. "Good boy, Scout," he said, ruffling the dog's fur. "You're always looking out for us, huh?" A week later, Mark was back on duty, patrolling the same side street where he'd found Scout. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with tension. Reports of a gang-related shooting had come in, and Mark was on high alert. As he turned a corner, his radio crackled to life. "All units, be advised. Armed suspects reported in the area. Proceed with caution." Mark's heart raced as he stepped out of his car, his hand resting on his holster. He scanned the area, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow. And then he saw them. 3 men, their faces covered, emerging from an alleyway. One of them raised a gun, and Mark barely had time to dive behind his car before the first shot rang out. The next few seconds were a blur. Mark returned fire, his training kicking in, but he was outnumbered. He felt a searing pain in his shoulder and realized he'd been hit. He slumped against the car, his vision blurring as the men advanced. This is it, he thought. This is how it ends. But then out of nowhere, a blur of fur and teeth launched itself at the nearest gunman. It was Scout. The dog snarled and bit down on the man's arm, causing him to drop his weapon. The other two men hesitated, clearly unprepared for this turn of events. Mark seized the opportunity, firing a warning shot that sent them running. Mark woke up in the hospital, his shoulder bandaged and his head throbbing. Sarah was by his side, her eyes red from crying. "You scared me," she whispered, squeezing his hand. Mark tried to speak, but his throat was dry. "Scout," he croaked. "Where's Scout?" Sarah's face softened. "He's here," she said. "He saved your life, Mark. The doctors said if he hadn't distracted those men—" Her voice broke, and she didn't finish the sentence. A few days later, Mark was discharged from the hospital. When he got home, Scout was waiting for him, his tail wagging so hard it shook his entire body. Mark knelt down, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, and wrapped his arms around the dog. "You're a hero, you know that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Scout responded by licking his face, and for the first time in his life, Mark felt a bond with an animal that he couldn't explain. Months passed, and Scout became a permanent member of the Harris family. He went everywhere with Mark, even to the police station, where he quickly became a favorite among the officers. But one day, as Mark was filling out paperwork, he received a call from the animal shelter. "We've got some news about Scout," the woman said. "Can you come down?" Mark's heart sank as he drove to the shelter. Had they found Scout's original owner? Was he going to lose the dog who had saved his life? But when he arrived, the woman handed him a folder. "We ran a DNA test on Scout," she said. "Turns out he's not just any stray. He's a retired police K9. His name was Max, and he served for 6 years before he went missing." Mark stared at the folder, his mind reeling. Scout, Max, had been a hero long before they'd met, and now he had a second chance to live the life he deserved. Mark looked down at the dog, who was sitting patiently at his feet, and felt a surge of gratitude. "You're not just a hero," he said, scratching Scout behind the ears. "You're family." The story of Scout and Officer Mark Harris is a reminder that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and that sometimes they have 4 legs and a wagging tail. If this story touched your heart, consider supporting organizations that rescue and rehabilitate retired canines or stray animals. Together, we can ensure that every hero gets the chance to live a life full of love and purpose.